In 1945, the world thought it was finally seeing the end of Nazi terror. But what they found in quiet towns was something no one could have imagined. A terrifying system designed to control and shape generations according to ideology. A truth so shocking that it would take years for the world to fully understand. To see why these systems existed, investigators had to look back to the years before the war, when Germany was trying to recover from a defeat that had left deep scars. The First World War had killed millions of German men. Families had lost fathers, sons, and brothers. At the same time, the country was struggling with a collapsed economy. Jobs were scarce, money was worthless, and people were desperate to survive. Families could barely support themselves, and many delayed having children. Birth rates dropped sharply, creating worry among the leaders who dreamed of a strong future Germany. Hitler and his close advisors were obsessed with the idea that the nation's survival depended on having more people. But not just any people. They wanted a population that fit their narrow definition of racial purity. They believed only certain physical traits like blonde hair, blue eyes, and Aryan ancestry were valuable. Everyone else, in their eyes, was a threat to the country's future. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, became the driving force behind this obsession. He saw the SS not only as an elite military force, but as the backbone of Germany's future generations. Himmler believed that to win the wars he was already planning in his mind, Germany needed children who were physically strong, mentally loyal, and genetically pure. In his thinking, a strong Germany required planning people from birth. He imagined a system that could produce the next generation of soldiers, leaders, and citizens who would carry the ideals of the regime without question. By December 1935, Himmler began putting his plan into action. He officially created a program that was supposed to support women who gave birth to children of the desired racial type. On paper, it sounded like charity, helping mothers, giving them privacy, and providing medical care. But beneath the surface, it was far from that. The program was designed to control who could have children and how those children would be raised. It was a system for selecting the right people to reproduce and shape society according to Nazi ideas. The program was called Lebensborn, which means fountain of life. The name suggested hope and growth, but its true purpose was far darker. At first, it offered financial support, medical supervision, and protected environments for mothers during pregnancy. Women who participated were told they would be safe, cared for, and respected. But every element of the program was carefully measured to ensure that the children born met strict standards. Doctors kept records of family histories, examined physical features, and followed every pregnancy closely to make sure only the most acceptable babies were born. Nothing was left to chance. As Lebensborn grew, the program became more organized and stricter. It was no longer just about encouraging births. It was about controlling every part of the process. Women were carefully selected, and the selection was not random. Doctors and officers measured them from head to toe, checking physical features that the Nazis considered ideal. Eye color, hair color, height, and even the shape of the skull were recorded. Families were investigated too. Parents, grandparents, and sometimes distant relatives were studied to ensure that no undesirable traits would appear in the children. Any political opposition or connection to groups the Nazis considered dangerous could immediately disqualify a woman. Even small details in ancestry could mean rejection. Those women who passed the strict tests were encouraged to give birth outside marriage. The SS promised that being a single mother would not bring shame or punishment. Instead, the state offered supervision, care, and a controlled environment. SS officers fathered many of the children, but they rarely played any role in raising them. Mothers were left under the care of staff who followed official instructions, while the father's connection was limited to a name on a record. In the eyes of the Nazis, this system ensured that children were born legally correct without social complications. Pregnancies and births were carefully managed in special homes. These were usually hidden in quiet rural areas or in estates taken over by the SS. The buildings were designed to feel comfortable, with gardens, clean rooms, and staff trained to give medical attention. Yet beneath the surface, everything was controlled. Some of the women believed in the ideology and accepted their role as part of the Reich's plan. Others were pressured or manipulated. Many were told that joining Lebensborn meant protection during a time when Germany was becoming more violent and unpredictable. For some, participation felt like survival. By the early years of the war, refusing entry to the program was difficult, and social or political pressure made resistance dangerous. From the moment a child was born, the state treated them as an asset. Each baby was carefully documented, tracked, and assigned a place in the system. Mothers were often separated from their children soon after birth if the SS decided the child would be better raised elsewhere. The child's loyalty to their family was considered secondary. The expectation was complete loyalty to the state and to the ideals of the Reich. Education, upbringing, and even small details of daily life were planned to shape children into what the Nazis imagined as the perfect generation. Outside Germany, the program remained largely invisible. Most people had no idea what was happening inside these homes. There were no signs, no public announcements, and no official records for the general population to see. To the world, these were simply maternity homes, quietly helping mothers in difficult times. But in truth, each birth was part of a deliberate program to shape the population. Every mother, every child, every record was a carefully controlled piece of a larger plan that few outside the Nazi leadership could understand. The program grew after Germany invaded Poland in September 1939. The Nazis gained control over huge areas of Eastern Europe. Occupying armies and administrators moved quickly to map every town, village, and region. They were not just interested in resources or military strategy. They wanted people. Racial officers from the SS traveled through communities, inspecting families, schools, and orphanages. They measured children, recorded hair and eye color, checked family histories, and evaluated physical traits against the Nazis' strict idea of who was desirable. Wherever the officers went, they were looking for children who fit the racial ideal. They were searching for physical features that resembled the Germanic image they wanted to impose on Europe. Blonde hair, light eyes, fair skin, and strong bodies were considered perfect. But this was more than physical appearance. The Nazis also checked ancestry, making sure children had no Jewish, Roma, or other undesirable background. Any deviation could disqualify a child from being selected. In towns across Poland, Czechoslovakia, and occupied parts of the Soviet Union, SS officers identified thousands of children who met their criteria. These children were not volunteers. They did not ask to be taken. Their families had no choice. Some parents were deceived with promises that their children would receive schooling or health care. Others were threatened, and some were simply overpowered during raids. In many cases, children were taken from orphanages, schools, or even their own homes, often in front of their terrified families. Once seized, the children were transported to Germany, sometimes hundreds of miles away. Their original names were erased. They were given German names and forced to speak only German. Speaking their native language was punished. If children resisted or tried to speak their own language, they could be beaten or sent to other facilities considered more suitable. They were all closely monitored, with officials recording their behavior, appearance, and adaptation. Every detail mattered because the Nazis believed they were remaking the child's identity. Not every child survived this process. Those deemed unsuitable after further testing were sent to orphanages, labor camps, or other institutions. Many simply disappeared, leaving families who might never know what had happened. Some children resisted assimilation and were punished harshly, while others tried to comply out of fear. By the middle of the war, Lebensborn had changed from a program that encouraged selected women to have children into a system of outright kidnapping in occupied countries. The scale and method of these abductions made it one of the most chilling parts of the Nazi plan. Children were no longer only being born to fit the ideology, they were being stolen to make the ideology real. This expansion showed how far the Nazis were willing to go to control life itself. What began as a program inside Germany to manage births had now crossed borders. Innocent children became instruments of the state. Families were torn apart. Communities were shaken. And the system moved forward under the quiet efficiency of bureaucracy, making the horror even harder for outsiders to detect. When Germany invaded Norway in April 1940, the Nazis quickly realized they had found a population that matched many of the traits they valued. Norwegians had light hair, light eyes, and tall builds. This made Norway a prime location for expanding Lebensborn. The program was no longer just about German women having children. It now included foreign populations that fit the Nazi racial ideal. The Nazis set up Lebensborn facilities across Norway, often in quiet towns and rural areas, away from public attention. These were presented as maternity homes, offering privacy and care for expectant mothers. Women who became pregnant by German soldiers or other approved men were encouraged to give birth there. The state removed barriers that would normally cause shame, punishment, or social exhaustion for unmarried mothers. Women were offered supervision, medical care, and support, but their lives were controlled. They were carefully registered, and every birth was documented. Pregnancies were closely monitored by medical staff, trained to ensure the child would meet the regime's racial expectations. Mothers were instructed on diet, health routines, and behavior to influence the outcome of the pregnancy. Births were supervised, and infants were examined and measured immediately after delivery. Staff recorded eye color, hair color, and body proportions. Each child received a file and a number, and their status in the program was tracked carefully. Even after birth, the children were categorized based on how well they met the Nazis' racial standards. Over 12,000 children were born under Lebensborn in Norway alone. Some of these children were sent to Germany to be raised in German families, aligned with the SS. Others remained in Norway, but were still formally part of the program. Being part of Lebensborn meant that the child's life was shaped from birth according to state plans. Language, education, and family connections were all influenced by the program's rules. The system worked efficiently because it relied on paperwork, bureaucracy, and careful management rather than force. Mothers were not chained, and children were not kept in cages, but the control was just as complete. Every detail from the moment of conception to the child's first steps was monitored. Mothers couldn't easily escape, and the program's authority was absolute. By using this method, the Nazis created a network that reached beyond Germany's borders, turning Norway into a model for how Lebensborn could manipulate life in occupied territories. By early 1945, it was clear that Germany was losing the war. Soviet forces were advancing from the east, and American and British armies were moving quickly from the west. SS leaders knew that defeat was coming, and they began trying to erase evidence of the programs they had built. In secret, they burned files, destroyed documents, and moved children from one facility to another, sometimes in the middle of the night. Mothers were left confused, staff were hurried, and some homes were simply abandoned, locked, and left to be discovered. Despite these efforts, it was impossible to hide everything. The scale of the program was too large, and the bureaucracy had left too many traces. In April and May of 1945, American soldiers entered towns and estates in southern Germany and Austria. In Bavaria, troops came across buildings that seemed ordinary at first. There were no barbed wires or armed guards, just quiet streets, gardens, and staff tending to children. But inside, the soldiers found homes filled with children, infants, and pregnant women, all under the supervision of SS-trained nurses and administrators. At first, confusion dominated. Officers tried to understand what these buildings were. Nurses insisted they were maternity homes. But the records told a different story. Files documented children being born to specific SS officers, showing measurements, racial evaluations, and assignments to families across Germany. The paperwork included every detail, from hair and eye color to family background, and even instructions for future care. Children had been reassigned to homes and families they had never met, and in some cases, mothers were separated from their babies immediately after birth. Investigators quickly realized that this was no ordinary medical care or charity. Every aspect of the program had been organized to meet the goals of the SS. Nothing about it was accidental. The homes were clean, orderly, and quiet, giving the appearance of normalcy. But behind the doors, lives had been controlled and shaped by ideology from the moment of conception. As more homes were uncovered across Germany and Austria, the connections between the facilities and the SS leadership became clear. Orders had come from high-ranking officials. Staff had followed strict protocols. Every child, every record, and every assignment was part of a coordinated plan. After Germany surrendered in May 1945, thousands of children born or taken through the Lebensborn program were now without families or identities. These children had been raised under strict control, with their origins erased or hidden. Some were only a few months old, while others were old enough to remember their homes, though those memories were often confused or manipulated. For many, the parents they had known were gone, either dead, missing, or separated from them by force. Repatriation teams tried to find families for these children, but their task was almost impossible. Records had been destroyed, and many children had been given new names and told lies about their birth. Some were so young that they had no memory of their original families at all. Others had been taught that their families had abandoned them or were unworthy of love, leaving the children confused and hesitant to return. Every reunion carried tension. Parents and children struggled to communicate, sometimes not even sharing the same language anymore. Simple gestures of affection often brought fear or shame because children had been trained to obey strict rules and punishments. In Poland, the recovery of children was especially complicated. Families had survived wars, deportations, and occupation, only to discover that their children had been taken and raised in German families. When children returned, they were often physically and emotionally different from the siblings and relatives who had survived the war. Adjusting to life at home was difficult. Many children felt torn between loyalty to the people who had cared for them during the war and the parents they had lost. In Norway, the situation was equally painful, but took a different form. Children born in Lebensborn homes were associated with German soldiers and the occupation, even if they had done nothing wrong. The public often saw them as reminders of collaboration and betrayal. Mothers were punished publicly, and children were labeled as outsiders, treated with suspicion, or openly rejected. Some were placed in institutions or foster care under harsh conditions, while others faced abuse or neglect from families who refused to accept them, and accountability was limited. After the war, the Allies held the Nuremberg trials to punish the leaders of Nazi Germany. The trials focused mainly on war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the Holocaust. Lebensborn was examined as part of these investigations because it had played a role in forced Germanization and the Nazis' racial policies. Prosecutors showed how the program had taken children from occupied countries, manipulated births, and trained a generation to serve the ideology of the SS. Documents and testimony revealed how carefully the system had been organized and how much it affected real lives. Despite the evidence, Lebensborn did not receive the same level of attention as the extermination camps. The full horror of mass killings had shocked the world, and other crimes of murder and torture took priority. Many people involved in Lebensborn, including administrators and medical staff, escaped serious punishment. Some officers were arrested and questioned, but most returned to ordinary lives once the trials ended. There were no widespread sentences or long-term imprisonment for those who had run the homes, overseen the program, or participated in the abductions. For the survivors of Lebensborn, this lack of accountability was another loss on top of what they had already suffered. The program faded from public discussion in the years following the war. Archives remained closed or scattered, and most of the details of Lebensborn were forgotten outside small circles of historians. Only much later, when documents were opened and researchers examined the records, did the stories of the children, mothers, and staff begin to emerge. Personal accounts, letters, and files helped piece together what had happened, but even then much was lost. In recent decades, advances in DNA technology have allowed some families to reconnect. Children who had been taken from their homes were able to find biological relatives, sometimes after decades of searching. For others, however, the connection was never made. Some families had disappeared entirely. Some children never knew their original names or parents. The scars of the program remained permanent, not only in identity, but in emotional trauma, mistrust, and the difficulty of belonging in a world that had treated them as instruments of ideology rather than human beings.